You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
What a turbulent week for Buckeye fans. What started with Michigan winning a national championship ended with a lot of hope in Columbus as a mass of returns. Nick Wilson, Spencer German, the Sons of the Shoe podcast. Make sure to follow the Sons of the Shoe podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, of course, the free Odyssey app, 923thefan.com. And, of course, make sure to subscribe right here on 923 The Fan's YouTube channel as well. Make sure to comment on our videos as well. We love interacting with you guys, even the Michigan fans who are always fun there. But as I had mentioned, Spencer German, what a wild, wacky, and turbulent week for Ohio State fans.
I think that's a good way to describe it. You get the emotions of having to watch your biggest rival win a national championship and everything that comes with that, which is something we obviously talked about earlier in the week. And I'm going to be honest, though, Nick, like my stance at the time was very much that that's a disaster and how could you possibly take any positive away from it? Like, you don't want to see your rival win. Nobody from Michigan was enjoying watching Ohio State win a national championship in 2014 when they won it. It's a miserable feeling. You don't want to see that happen. But I do think, like, we've had the conversation, and I think there's probably some truth to the idea that this really was. Now, maybe it shouldn't have been the ultimate wake-up call. Maybe they should have seen this coming years prior when you lose to Michigan a couple years in a row. But this seems like it has served as a major, major wake-up call, given what we've seen transpire since, with all the guys that are coming back. I know we're going to go through the list with just it sounds like I know there was talk, and I know you talked to Albert Breer on your show on 92 Through the Fan, that after that game, it sounds like there was a big push for like hat in hand money, like donations coming in, like, oh, we need money to try to pay these kids, like NIL money. Let's get the collective really moving here. And I have to imagine that has something to do with the number of guys who have come back, that they've sort of got their money in order. And now there's even talk that with I know another thing we'll get to, Nick Saban leaving, that maybe there's room to even add some players from that team that are going to enter the transfer portal. So like on some level, I think it was a wake-up call. And I think we're seeing the aftermath of that play out in real time, where Ohio State is going all out to make themselves a national championship contender and bring back a roster that is going to be absolutely stacked next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's fascinating is Ohio State's gotten a lot of flack, and rightfully so, for not seemingly spending enough NIL money in different places. That was part of the Carson Hinsman complaint on the ever since deleted podcast, which I'm pretty sure is now basically like a UFO file. Like, it's just tucked away somewhere in Columbus at a catacomb. We'll never see it again. All right. Well, I don't even know that Carson Hinsman exists anymore. Like, that's some Men in Black type crap going on
Ohio
over
State
there.
showed up and they like took the audio. They pulled it off the internet. They showed up at his house. They searched his computer. They searched his room. They searched everything. They took everything they could. Now I think you're right. They just have a basement. It's like Disney. They every so often they're like, oh, the Disney vault is opening up and we're releasing this. That's what it is. Like every now and then you'll hear like, oh, the audio's out there, and then like, no, Ohio State covered that shit up.
I just like the idea that it's like Urban Meyer is like part of, because Urban's such a Tommy Toughnut that Irby Two Digits has like an SS program that they run, that he like, yeah, sure, it's Ryan Day's program, but Urban Meyer's program is the Secret Service part of this. And so, with all this being said,
that's his role with the team still, because they say
yes.
Sometimes is around Columbus, like he's in charge of running like the Ohio State FBI, the Ohio State Secret Service,
the Ohio State Black Ops teams that just erases everything. But I mean, I do think that's an interesting point, that they've just been throwing money from the NIL to keeping guys here, bringing them back. And they also did make a couple staff changes. Special teams coach Julian Fleming. I'm going to screw it up. Special teams coach
Parker Fleming.
Parker Fleming, totally different guy. is no longer with the program. They did swap out safeties coaches as well. That's all we've heard to this point officially, so we'll see if there are any more changes on the horizon on the coaching staff. The special teams one was clearly the one that made a lot of sense. But, I mean, the headline here is the names that are returning. And it was cool when Tyleik Williams, defensive tackle, said he was coming back. It was really great. I mean, I was pretty surprised when Denzel Burke on Wednesday said, I'm coming back. But to date, the only two Buckeyes going to the pros that really were significant contributors, starters playing bulk of the snaps, are Maserati Marv, which was not surprising, and Michael Hall, the defensive tackle. But yesterday it was a bombshell. We tried to record yesterday. Your boy overslept. My bad. And it ended up being the best oversleep in history because in the time that we would have already recorded this podcast and put it out, JT Tuimoloau announced that he was coming back, and Travion Henderson was the last of this year's class to really say, the ones that we were really worried about, are they going pro, are they not? And Travion Henderson announcing late in my show yesterday that he was returning to Ohio State. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Travion made sense to me because of the injuries, and it kind of made sense, like, with the way running back contracts are set up, 1 year's probably not going to cost him as much, especially if he's a mid-round pick instead of a first-round pick. So a 3 or 4 year deal versus a 5 year deal. So I think you can kind of make NIL make sense for that kind of guy, and his ability to stay healthy and prove that, in a running back committee with Quinshon Judkins this year, Quinshon can do all the dirty works in between the tackles, and then they can just let Travion be just kind of this weapon. So I got to be honest with you, dude. I'm blown away that Travion's coming back. I'm blown away that JT Tuimoloau is coming back, and you put it all together in a big context, and it's really impressive what Ohio State's been able to retain going into next year.
I just want to say, too, I had to laugh on, I guess it really was just on Friday, the number of people who I saw on social media trying to talk themselves into the idea that Marvin Harrison Jr. was also coming back. And the argument they used was like, I don't know, we're getting down to the wire. Like, Monday's the last day to declare, and he hasn't done it yet. Seems kind of curious. He's looking around, seeing all these other guys coming back. I feel like there's something there. And I was thinking, guys, we don't do this. Don't do this to yourself. We did it last year with CJ Stroud. He waited till the very last day, and we kept hearing like, oh, maybe they're throwing money at him and maybe he's going to come back. And I got my hopes up. Everybody else got their hopes up. We all thought it was maybe possible that he'd come back to Ohio State because he wanted to finish and try to win a few things and maybe a national championship. He wanted to beat Michigan before he left. And then what happened? He waited till the last day. He ended up declaring, and now he's on his way to potentially winning Offensive Rookie of the Year in the NFL. Hopefully he doesn't have an Offensive Rookie of the Year type performance against the Browns later today, but that's another conversation. But yeah, like I wasn't going to do that to myself. It was pretty evident that Marvin Harrison Jr. was going to go pro once you kind of saw he wasn't practicing leading up to the Cotton Bowl. Once you saw he wasn't going to play in that game, you kind of knew the writing was on the wall, and it makes too much sense for him to leave. But I don't want that to distract from the fact that of what we're talking about here, which is the idea that so many of these other players are coming back and that this roster is going to be absolutely loaded, particularly on defense. I mean, the running back thing and Travion coming back is huge, and him and Quinshon Judkins sort of sharing sharing carries and sort of splitting that backfield and sort of giving you two different looks in terms of the guys that they are and the players that they are and the style that they run with. It's going to be one of the hardest things for Big Ten defenses, other defenses once you get to playoff season to prepare for the idea that you have this kind of change of pace backfield. I mean, my God, like just a wealth of talent on this team, and especially at that position. Offense is going to be loaded. The offense is going to essentially come down to, are they adding any more at the offensive line to sort of protect Will Howard and be able to really open up the running lanes for those two guys? And is Will Howard going to play better than Kyle McCord? Because people still have questions about that. I understand too. But on the defensive side of things, here's the thing. I feel like I've heard some people and their stance on all the guys coming back, which just feels like a weird stance to me. But there's been some people who the stance of all these guys coming back has been, well, we're bringing all these guys back from a team that couldn't beat Michigan, couldn't get to the playoff, couldn't do this, couldn't do that. Like they're pointing out all the things that they couldn't do. And I just don't get, especially the defensive side of the ball, where that concept comes from, because this defense this past year was already really good. Like, were they generating pressure the way Michigan did? No, but like they were a very good defense, and they did still do a solid job against Michigan to the point where that was a one possession game and you had a chance to beat them. But then on top of that, Nick, the idea that you would just completely eliminate from your mind any concept of development in players seems strange to me, because and that was how many times do we hear people all year like, well, Kyle McCord could just, he might just need time. It might just take time for him to develop and become this player. Like, I saw Jack Sawyer develop literally right in front of our eyes this season. I've been asking questions about where was this guy. He was touted as the next Bosa, the long lost Bosa brother, the third Bosa brother that wasn't part of the family actually, and he hasn't really delivered. And then late in the season this year, he started playing really, really well. And then I think the Cotton Bowl was kind of his I don't know, the climax of his story, if you will, where he's where he's finally I'm struggling for analogies this morning, I guess. And he played so well in that game that it gives you hope that he's going to kind of turn that corner and become more of a standout player, and that player that you thought he could be when he came to Ohio State as one of their top 10 recruits of all time next year. So I don't know, like to not be able to comprehend the idea that this defense, like they were really, really good. And there's areas where you're like, could they get better as a pass rushing team? Yes. Could they get better in a few other areas? Yes. But the idea that they can't develop with another year, like that's the whole point of these guys coming back. And we see it in college basketball, we see it in college football. Like when you keep core groups together, that often pays dividends for you. I mean, look what Michigan did. Michigan brought all these guys back. They go and they win the national championship. They weren't as good as a defense and a team last year as they were this year. They got better. So I'm super excited, especially for the defensive side of the ball, because I think that group is going to be so good. And to see just the number of guys who are bought into, the NIL's part of it, but bought into trying to come back and win something here at Ohio State, it has to be exciting. I don't know how it can be anything else.
Well, and I just think the reality is experience matters in college football.
Yes.
Right. And, I don't think it's coincidence that over the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of teams with those more experienced players, guys who've been in college 6, 7, 8 years because of COVID and the transfer rules and all this. You've seen them at least have a better chance at making the playoffs, the more experienced rosters. I just think for me, what it symbolizes is, it's funny. You and I got pinged on our station this week because we weren't panicking. You were panicking a little bit more than I was, but by and large, like I looked at the Michigan National Championship and said, let's go, right? They've finally come in to this rivalry. This rivalry is officially back with them having won 3 straight games. I thought it was more about their glow up, right, than it was that Ohio State took a step back. But it's time. And so to see this roster, to see the coaching staff take shape, to see the roster take shape, to me what this really says is, all right, Ryan, like I'm not happy with where Ryan Day is. I'm not panicking about where it is. But I open the door that next year is insanely crucial for him. But when you start to look at the actual roster itself, find me the excuse. Because if the O-line isn't good enough again, well, that's on Ryan Day. That's not a valid excuse. If Will Howard isn't a better fit for this offense, and that means a better quarterback for Ohio State, then that's on Ryan Day. So last year, when I say last year, I mean the quarterback position, you got your gimme. That was your mulligan. And now this year, with this kind of talent, with the staff changes, there's no excuses, because you will have one of the deepest teams in college football, and you will have almost all your star power back. and specifically on offense, Abuka, Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, Brandon Ennis, G. Scott, Quinshon Judkins, Dallas Hayden, Travion Henderson. That is enough to have the kind of offense that we're used to seeing from Ryan Day instead of what felt like a very herky-jerky, anemic offense at point last year that was pretty much just throw the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. whenever you get a chance.
So in that vein, is this, in your opinion, a roster that is a blessing or is it a curse for Ryan Day? Because I'm going into it like, you know me, like I'm the emotional fan. I react as the team does things and I get really into it. And that's why the Michigan panic meter just goes like this all the time. It's like, here it's in the gray. Now it's in the, but anyway, like I'm more on the excited side of it where I see the opportunity here and I'm willing to go in the next year and be like, okay, like I'll admit, and you know, like we both have been maybe less critical of Ryan Day at times than others. Now I think the Cotton Bowl sort of turned things for me where I was like, all right, this guy to put up 3 points in this game, I don't really think the game itself mattered. But to see that performance for a guy who's supposed to be some offensive guru and all this, it was like, okay, this is really disappointing. So, yeah, like I'm willing to go in the next year with questions, with some doubts about him as a coach. I've said it on this show that I think he puckers. He almost becomes James Franklin in key moments at times, and it's disappointing, except against James Franklin. And
you can never out James Franklin, just so we're clear.
Well, we got to get to that later, but the fact that his name was floated as a potential for the Alabama job is out of this world ridiculous. But anyway,
if I had James Franklin's agent, I would have Jeff Bezos money. I'm just going to tell you that right now.
You'd be a WFAN right now or something?
Yeah, I would be beyond that. I would make Colin Cowherd. I would make Colin Cowherd look like a host in Boise, Idaho. That's with James Franklin's agent, anything is possible. I'm pretty damn sure. But you mentioned, so you asked a question about, is it a blessing? Is it a curse? And I think, listen, I think it's a blessing for Ohio State and whatever new AD you have, because there's no room for excuses. There really isn't. And I think it is a blessing for Ryan Day until it's not. And what I mean by that is, I think if you're a head coach going into a year where it may or may not be as simple as you have to go undefeated, you have to beat Michigan, you have to win the Big Ten title, you have to compete in the playoffs, if not win a national championship. As much pressure as that is, as rough as that can be, the reality is you would want everything at your disposal if that was the case. And it sure seems like from a talent perspective, even though, man, it'd be nice to get at least one tackle in the portal. Caleb Downs is a name that has been, and he's a safety from Alabama. That's a name that has really been out there a lot, that the Buckeyes are throwing some NIL money at him.
They recruited him initially, and he chose Bama. I mean, the Saban thing changes the game. Like, I think that's part of this equation too, Nick, in terms of like talking about this roster being a blessing or a curse, because like if you think about the landscape of college football, if you're Ryan Day, like now Nick Saban's kind of out of the picture now, right? And I'm not saying Alabama's going to be garbage, but Kalen DeBoer takes that job. We see the recruits that are considering transferring, all these different things. Like that team's not going to be the same. And I mean, let's face it, like that's the greatest college football coach of all time. That's now not in your path necessarily towards a championship. So that he's out of the way. There's a chance here that Jim Harbaugh is going to go to the pros. And so now he's out of your way. And so like the stage is set. Like there is a path that's kind of clear for you to build this amazing roster. And the only real teams that you feel like are going to be massive challengers to you are maybe a Florida State, depending on the guy. They had a lot of guys transfer, though. That's the biggest thing for them. But like Georgia's always going to be in the conversation. Kirby Smart's a great coach. Oregon's still probably going to be there with Dan Lanning, although they're going to have a different quarterback next year. So like there's these teams that are there, but the path is even more clear than it's ever been potentially. So like I think it is a blessing for him. I think it's also a blessing for Ohio State because they're going to get the clearest picture they can on whether or not Ryan Day should be here long term. Like we're going to have all all the questions that we have answers about, in regards to Ryan Day and his future and his ability to lead this team and all that, those are going to be answered this year. Like, because there's no excuses now. Like, there's nothing standing in his way from being making a deep playoff run, beating Michigan, like all the boxes that you want to check. He should accomplish all those things this year. So listen, I think it's a blessing because they're bringing back a talented roster and it's an opportunity to go win something and have a really special season. But I do think it's more of a blessing for Ryan Day because, like, on one hand, yeah, the pressure's on, but I think the moves and the actions of this week tell me that he already knows that anyway. Like, he knows the pressure's on, and now he's just got to go deliver, and that should be ultimately where his head is at anyway. So I think it's a blessing all around. I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is if you're going into a season where it is, whether it's championship or bust or beat Michigan or bust, however you want to frame it, and that's something we'll get into, in future episodes, that specific or bust, the reality is you want a full deck. You want as much at your disposal as possible. And from a roster perspective, I mean, the cup runneth over right now with all these returning players. Real quick, because you know what? I want to hold it. I have a question about the returnees.
Yeah. Real quick, I was going to say off of your point, the reason it's a blessing is because it shrinks that margin of error for Ryan Day even more in terms of like winning on the football field. Like, we have questions about him as a coach at times. Like, oh, he does, is he going to be aggressive on fourth down situations and all this different stuff? If you have as much talent as Ohio State has coming back, he now makes it so that his job is just a little bit easier on game day because he doesn't necessarily have to overthink things. Well, hey, 4th and 2, I got Quinshawn Judkins, who's one of the best in between the tackle runners in the game. I'm just going to give him the damn football. Like, that's the type of stuff that, like, why I think it's a good thing for him, because now if we're worried about him as a coach, I'm not. This is going to sound bad, but like, if he has to almost coach less, that helps his cause. And I'm not saying that that's how it should be, and you want the best of the best at Ohio State in terms of X's and O's and all these different things. But I think that if there's an opportunity to make his life easier because his team is just so ultra talented, I think that works in his favor, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Well, and I just think it's as simple as now it's about culture. And the hope is, because that really is, and I agree with a lot of Ohio State fans have said this, Michigan fans have said this, the difference between Michigan and Ohio State the last couple of years has been culture and a focus. And, I think Ohio State's focus has been world domination. And I think Michigan's focus has been, we're going to start with dominating the Big Ten and work out from there. And I think that 3-year plan came to fruition. They started dominating the Big Ten 3 years ago, and specifically, running the rivalry, running the game. And now they're running the Big Ten. They're running the world now. So I think now it becomes, all right, are these coaching changes really going to help you change the culture? And what are you, Ryan Day, doing to change the culture? Because if he thinks, well, now I have so much talent, I don't have to worry about properly emphasizing the Michigan game, or I don't have to, worry about the changing tides in college football where the gap between the top 3 teams and the top, 4 teams behind them is now nil. Whereas, 3 years ago, that's all that mattered was talent to some degree on a national level. If he thinks that just, okay, my work's done because the collective and I have re-recruited our own roster back, I think that's going to bite him in the ass. So, from a roster perspective, all right, bring in Caleb Downs, maybe Caden Proctor, another Alabama, another Alabama player that Ohio State was in on until the very last second, until he went to Bama. Like, let's see if you can find a couple more pieces here. But now it is, how do you get these guys understanding the importance of not just beating Penn State and all these, but making sure you beat Michigan, making sure you bring home the Big Ten title. And I think if you start home, if you start where it matters and then build from there, very much like Michigan did, I think you could have those dividends paid this year. And I think Ryan Day could answer all of his questions in 1 year. And that means running the gambit of beating Michigan, winning the Big Ten, and winning a national title.
I think that's a good perspective, I think that's a good point. I also think too, Nick, like to me, part of this comes down to, can Ryan Day do basically, you mentioned Michigan's focus shifting to like, let's just worry about the Big Ten first and go from there. I mean, the script we've talked about already. Like the script's already been flipped because Michigan goes and wins a national title right in your face. But like Ryan Day now has to do what Jim Harbaugh did, right? Like it's almost the entire narrative shifting to you now of what we thought about Michigan a couple years ago, which was, oh well, they can't beat Ohio State, they can't beat Urban Meyer. Like Jim Harbaugh just has to admit that on some level, Urban Meyer was his daddy. Like he owned him. He could not get past the mighty Urban Meyer. And now Ryan Day kind of has to concede the same thing. I can't get past Jim Harbaugh. And if Jim Harbaugh goes to the pros, okay, so now the question becomes, can you do what Michigan did? Are you capable of not worrying so much about like, well, let's just be this fast-paced team and go out and have all these sports cars and be this finesse team? Like, let's focus on doing what we need to do to win this conference, beat that team finally, and go one step at a time and reverse your misfortune. Like, can you now become the thing that Sharon Moore can't overcome, or whoever the hell the next head coach of Michigan potentially becomes, assuming Jim Harbaugh leaves? Like, can you now flip that script in your favor? And I think he's capable of it with the roster, especially that he has coming back. But we're going to find that out pretty quickly here, which is why I think this is a good thing all around, because we're going to get answers to our questions. He's going to have an opportunity to answer his questions. This roster is, I mean, it's going to be a fun season, I think, ahead, just because of the fact that this group is going to be so stacked.
All right, leave your comments below here, guys. Or Nick Wilson says at Spencito _ on X, is all this returning talent? Is this talent that Columbus is kind of amassing here? Is this a blessing or a curse for Ryan Day? And the least surprising news this week, and a chance to say goodbye to one of the true Ohio State greats. That's coming up. But first, a word from our sponsors.